Today we're talking about dreams, hatchathons, and the role of a missionary. It's the Sustainable Ministry Show, episode number 12. That might just work. Well, friends, it's that time again for the Sustainable Ministry Show, and we are really excited today. We've got some great conversation ahead of us. Today we're joined with Kenda Dean and Mark DeVries, Melissa Rao, and Stephen Ingram. And before we jump into that, just want to let you know about a couple things. In a few weeks coming up, we've got some conversations about managing conflict in the church that we're going to talk about. We've also got a discussion about leaving well. So when the time comes that you have to vacate your position, how do you do that and set the ministry up for success even as you depart from the church? So that's going on. We will be talking about a hatchathon in a little bit, but that is taking place March 2nd through 4th at Princeton. And then we also want to let you know about Ministry Incubators too. Some of you may be familiar with that, but if you go to ministryincubators.com, you can find more about what they are doing there and helping people with ministry dreams to bring those to life. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We also want to let you know about one other thing. The Princeton Forum on Youth Ministry is coming up in April, and it's not too late to register if you haven't done so yet. So check that out online. So let's get started with some introductions, you guys. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world, who you are, and then if there's some ministry organization that you're really excited about, that you're just excited about what they're doing. Let's share those two. What is that?
Hey, I just got back this morning from spending a couple days at Westmont College in beautiful Santa Barbara, California, and working with them on one of these Lilly grants for a youth institute to help kids think theologically, and they have such an incredible sort of integrative approach. So a lot of times, what I've observed in a lot of these sort of organizations is that they sort of immerse kids in the world of theology with a nice introduction to that world of biblical studies and church history and theology. But often that gets continues to be cut off from the rest of their life. They just get a new language for another compartment of their life. And what I love about the approach that Westmont is taking, they're calling this the Trailhead program, and with all the metaphors you can use there in terms of there's some winding, there's some uphill, there's some drudgery, all of that stuff. But they are finding some really creative ways of weaving together the various academic disciplines with theological reflection, with vocational discernment. So one of the descriptors is when kids are finishing up high school, they're looking for a job. These Christian kids, they love Jesus, they want to change the world, and they got to go to college, and they're thinking about all of these things, but often they're running in these parallel tracks. And what Westmont is doing is kind of bringing those all together, and that was something that really got me excited this past week.
Love it. Kenda, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm Kenda Dean, and I teach at Princeton Seminary. So the thing that comes to my mind is something that we've been developing for the last few months, and we're probably a year away from it being widely available, but it's definitely in the development stages. But the Youth Philanthropy Academy, which is it's a summer program where they're bringing kids together who are essentially in the process of developing ministries as nonprofits and helping these kids get their ministries off the ground as their own entities. And they were working with an outfit in Atlanta called Giving Point, which helps young people do this generally. And some of the youth who are part of Giving Point will be some of the instructors for the Youth Philanthropy academy, which I think is pretty cool. But what we're hoping to do is to help these young people who have this impulse to make the world a better place recognize that that is actually part of their vocation. So it's bringing in their identity as Christians into and their impulse to change the world, which ought not to be separated together. It's odd; they're oddly bifurcated right now. So anyway, that's in the works, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Excellent, excellent. Melissa?
Yeah, so I'm Melissa Rao, and I'm super excited about a nonprofit organization that we're going to be launching in about a week and a half or so. And it's a movement called Save God's Kids. And it's because every 26 seconds, a Christian dies needlessly from a heart attack or a stroke or diabetes, and oftentimes of what they're eating. And so these kids got together from being passionate about what people are eating, and they're trying to create a movement called Save God's Kids, or I'm a Bright. Excited about it. You can learn more by visiting www.savegodskids.org.
Love it. I love it. I'm so glad you finally are able to announce that. It's awesome.
I know.
Stephen?
Yeah, so my name's
Yeah.
Stephen Ingram. I work here in Birmingham at Canterbury United Methodist. In terms of, I don't have any cool philanthropy organizations right now that are kind of new in my world. But I will tell you something I'm pretty consistently recommending to folks to help with their ministry is Ministry Tracker. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ministry Tracker, but I have found that it for me, it's one of the best tools for organizing your ministry, both in attendance and communication, facilities usage, kind of across the board. So it's not a cool philanthropy like you guys have, but it is a really useful tool that I find myself recommending almost every time I talk to a youth minister right now.
That's excellent. And my name is Bryant Johnson, and the director of youth ministries at Harrison United Methodist Church, and also a consultant with Ministry Architects. And the organization that I'm really thrilled with right now, and I just discovered, you guys may know the story of Homeboy Industries, which is out in LA. Just a wonderful, beautiful story. And had a friend who's in young adult ministries go out there recently to really look at what they're doing. And they told him, one of the questions is, how can we be like this? How can we repeat this? And similar to what I think we do for churches, but they told him, we can't help you repeat this, but we can help you discover what opportunities for mission work need to take place in your town, and that being Charlotte. And so they're carrying on some conversation about that now and what that could possibly look like. So very exciting. Just a wonderful story of somebody who had a heart and a passion for a place that was struggling out in LA to make a difference in the world of gang violence out there. So wonderful and exciting. Mark and Kenda, you guys are involved in this thing called Ministry Incubators. Would one of you please tell us what that is? Where did it come from? What are you hoping to accomplish through Ministry Incubators?
Well, like most things, it all began at Einstein's Bagels. Kenda and I were, this was maybe 3 years ago, and we've had the chance to work together on a lot of projects over the years. But we both sort of felt like we're at a stage of probably having more ideas than we have years left in our lives. And so we thought, how can we help folks that have a harebrained idea for ministry, and bring some encouragement, a little social capital, maybe a little bit of counseling and support to help them get their harebrained ideas off the ground. Sometimes all you need is somebody who thinks it's possible. And so actually, this is Kenda's title. She has put on our business cards for Ministry Incubators. Our title is Permissionary. And so the whole idea is that we just give people permission to do the thing that they might have otherwise thought was impossible. Kenda, you want to add to that?
I'm enjoying hearing you describe this because it makes it sound really tidy. The truth is, I think part of that conversation, if I recall, was me venting my frustration at, how come the business world gets all the good ideas, and what happens to the church being the incubator, literally, for ways that we go about trying to have social impact and as disciples, not just as people who want to have a socially conscious enterprise. And anyway, it's at this point where if Mark's involved in any conversation, things start to blow up, because then things like, well, why not, start to be discussed. And so so why not is the birthplace of Ministry Incubators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of Kenneth's favorite lines in that conversation was, why does the church have to be the place where all the great ideas go to die? And in the same way that during the Renaissance period, the church was sort of the epicenter of creativity, and really was an incubator for art, and we're pretty excited about having the chance to maybe create on a very small scale, something similar.
Yeah.
I'm really interested by what you said in terms of the permission giving. I was listening to a podcast just a couple of days ago with Rob Bell was interviewing Dinah Butler Bass about her new book, Grounded. And that they got off on a tangent about, she said she feels like her vocation right now is just giving permission. She feels like her job in life is just to give people permission. And that is that twice in a week. And that's really interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like I know all four of you pretty well, and it feels like all of us have had people in our lives that have said, "Yeah, why not? Let's do this thing." And that is interestingly, it's not that complex to say why not, and let's try. So we're in that game. The other thing, Bryant, that we've stumbled on in this process is this little obscure verse in Numbers chapter 8 that is.
I know exactly which one
you are you with me? You Episcopalians know all about
the Bible bars, right? Yeah.
minor points of the Torah.
I got you.
So, Melissa, you want to just go ahead and share?
No, I was totally kidding.
Okay, so Numbers chapter 8, there are these instructions for the Levites, right? And it says when you're 25, you're allowed, if you're a Levite, you're allowed to begin to serve in the temple. But when you turn 50, not 65, when you turn 50, you are no longer allowed to serve in the temple. You are allowed to help those who are serving in the temple, but you're not allowed to serve anymore. And at least I think at this stage of our lives, we're feeling like we have the freedom to now say we no longer have to be the ones actually doing it, but can be the ones that are helping those that are now, in the younger generation beginning to do those things.
Yeah. And I think part of we bring two different angles to this, right? Because Mark has consulted with churches forever, and I've been teaching seminarians forever. And for people who are coming into ministry now, it used to be that youth ministry was kind of an on-ramp for a lot of people. And there were lots of conversations about whether that was bad, that we stay in youth ministry for life. And, I think most of the people in this conversation have in various ways. But the reality now is that the question isn't so much whether youth ministry is an on-ramp, but is there any on-ramp? Because people are no longer imagining themselves, and the statistics point this out, fewer than half of the folks who get an MDiv degree today think that they will be serving in full-time ministry. And so it's interesting to think about how the leadership of the church is changing in such a way, which I actually think is hugely exciting, because it's forcing us to think about how do we get beyond the walls of the church and into the community, in part because we're going to need to be employed both places, and we're going to need to be engaged both places. So, while there's a certain amount of financial angst that's driving a lot of interest in bivocational, I don't like the word bivocational. I think we got one vocation. I tend to talk about hybrid ministries. Sometimes that's driven financially, and that's a huge spiritual gift to be financially desperate, because then you try things you wouldn't try otherwise. But the truth is, it's allowing for us to engage creatively and engage missionally in communities in ways that we've just talked about for the last 30 years. While it was financially possible for us to stay within the four walls of our churches, we have. And that's no longer a thing that we get to really assume. And my students absolutely do not assume that they will be able to do that, even if they would want to do that. But the truth is, most of them don't want to do that. They like the idea of engaging in the community as an envoy of the church, and as, whether that is by being involved economically or in other ways. But the point is, they've got a different kind of impetus for thinking about new and creative ways to think about missional innovation that there just wasn't a need to do even 10 years ago.
So with all that kind of going into the development of Ministry Incubators then, and understanding that a lot of folks are going to work somewhat in the church and somewhat in some other thing, is that where the idea of the Hatchathon came from, to help really then empower people and give that permission to folks to do something?
No. The Hatchathon came from sheer envy that there are these great business incubators out there for anybody who wants to develop an app. And I'm sorry, why do people who develop apps get to have all the fun? Right? I mean, there are amazingly creative people who ought to be applying that creativity to ministry. And we couldn't figure out for the life of us, why does it always have to translate into an app? Why can't it translate into some incredible new idea about the way we go about doing business in the church and the way the church is engaged in the world? Why isn't that the fruit of some of this creative stuff? So the first thing was, well, okay, sure, we should get some people in ministry involved in some of these business things because there's great possibility for creativity and blah, 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 which is awesome, until we realized that, whoa, wait a minute. Most of the people who we work with don't even know about these conversations about, business innovation. And they are nowhere near ready to get into a business accelerator. Every now and then I'll have a student who has an undergrad degree in social entrepreneurship. They can participate in those. But by and large, people who are doing ministry are still they're still wrapping their mind around the fact that they're allowed to think about something that's a social enterprise, and that counts as ministry. You're not leaving ministry in order to do that. That actually is a form of ministry. And that's a big difference in the way millennials are looking at this whole tent making thing, and the way like people in my era were looking at it. It used to be that if you did a tent making thing, you might do something else. You might make your tents in order to pay for the ministry, which is really what you were meant to do. Now, my students are saying, no, I'm going to do ministry as, somebody who runs this nonprofit, or as somebody who's making shoes to distribute at a lower cost someplace else. That is a ministry. And, oh yeah, by the way, I also happen to have a job in the church. So, I think that the pendulum has just shifted, and we're in a different place. And hugely possible ideas that we didn't have permission to think about before. Somewhere in there's an answer to your question, Bryant. I'm sure.
Well, who are the ideal candidates to come if they wanted to hatch an idea and put it into practice? Who are the ideal people that would be coming to y'all to work with you?
We sometimes describe those people as early stage missional entrepreneurs. So these are folks that may or may not actually have a cooked up business plan. And they're usually if they've started their thing at all, they're usually in the first year or so of their endeavor. So, a couple examples of folks that we get the chance to work with and who have attended Hatchathon before. Of course, you guys know Nate Stuckey well, who now is the director of the Farminary, and he was hatching, in lots of other places, but brought this idea to the Hatchathon, to our very first one, and that sort of unfolded from there. There's another woman named Jess Winderweedle who is actually at Kenda's church, and they got a grant for young adult ministry to do a food truck. So it's actually called a feed truck, and and now this is, what is it, Kenda, 2 years or so, over 2 years since that first Hatchathon.
Yeah.
But the feed truck is out there through, not right now in February in New Jersey, but they're out there selling handcrafted egg sandwiches, and with a wonderful sort of mission to the 90+% of students on college campuses that don't go to campus ministries or churches anywhere. And that there are chaplains that travel with the feed truck. It's just fabulous. And then we have Stephen, you'll love this. We're working with a woman in Houston who, a Methodist pastor who has started a gastro church. Like gastro pub, but it's a gastro church. It's all sort of tied in with the slow food movement, and it's unbelievable. She cannot do enough of these and sells out every time. And the people that want to come to these are not necessarily people who are church people, but they have deepening conversations, and then they wrap up the meal. And Meredith says, thank you for coming. If we're going to take a little break, if any of you want to stay for communion as we wrap up our night, you're welcome. But there's no, there's no sort of pressure or sort of imposing church on people, but it's really a very inviting sort of community. Anyway, those were, Melissa, those are three of the kind of audiences that we've had. And so we'll have, in a couple of weeks when we do our next Hatchathon, I think we'll have somewhere between 10 and 15 different ideas that'll come, and at various stages of undevelopment, right? and we walk them through these kind of 8 to 10 different modules that help them just begin to put some legs on these crazy ideas.
What are you guys seeing as sort of the biggest hurdles that folks are having to jump over to get to a place where they actually feel confident enough to begin to present that idea and then really take the next steps to implementing the idea? Because I would imagine there are a lot of people with an itch that they feel like, what I'm being called to is not just within, like Kenda said, within the four walls of the church, but they still have a love for the church. And so what are you seeing the hurdles that maybe we can name that folks who are watching this podcast can identify maybe in their own lives, and you guys can help them kind of traverse that?
I think the biggest hurdle is confidence. Most of us who are in churches are, we're trying to do a lot of things, but the last thing in the world that we feel confident doing is, starting a business that, and what's more, we're kind of gun shy about it because we've been told for so long that, wait a minute, the church can't have any profit because the tax code and blah, 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 blah. And so we just sort of run away from the whole thing altogether without realizing that places like Homeboy Industries, which is just an incredible example of this. Homeboy Industries is a nonprofit. It's not funded entirely by its cafes and its bakeries and so on. About a third of its income comes from its social enterprise. But the truth of the matter is, you got Father Greg Boyle is confronted with the need to be in ministry to gang members, and they need jobs. And you get really creative when you are face to face with that kind of immediate need. And you kind of figure out the rest of it along the way. So they've gotten a lot more sophisticated over time. They've, they had a period where they about went bankrupt, and so they've had their ups and downs. But that's true of almost any venture anyway. So part of it is just realizing that just because you're a minister doesn't mean that you are exempt from the same economic and social opportunities that anybody else in your community has. So anyway, to me, that's hurdle number one, is just believing that this counts as ministry, and I've got something to offer that might actually succeed.
I think, Stephen, too, the challenge of people thinking their idea is not good enough. And I walk down the mall. I walk, I'm getting to that age, right? So I'm walking at the mall to get exercise, and I walk by these shops, and I think, how in the world? How in the world can they're paying thousands of dollars a month for their space, for their retail space? They're doing something like selling $5 earrings, or how about the whole shaving thing? Like somebody said, we can have a business where we sell nothing but razors. Seriously? And
wait. Tell them about beard wax.
What's that?
Tell them about beard wax.
Oh, one of our clients is a group of folks that are they are funding a lot of their youth ministry training with a beard balm, and they have created this product called Beard Balm, and it is the funding mechanism for their ministry. It's cray. But the whole idea is, you all have heard me say before, you don't have to have a good idea. You just have to have a stupid idea with enthusiasm, and usually it works. So I think that's there is this thought of, I've got to have a great idea. Just implement a mediocre idea, implement it well, and you'll do, because we're not talking about building a Fortune 500 company. For most of these folks, if they can generate $100,000 a year, which is a pretty tiny company, really, if you can generate $100,000 a year, that's huge in the ministry side of things.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, when you talk about obstacles, it's related to that. I think there are people who really want to have a big idea, but they don't, and they feel really like they're out of the loop, because it's like, I'd love to have an idea that I could translate into a missional enterprise, but I got nothing. In fact, what I'm really good at, I'm clearly not talking about myself here, but what I'm really good at, somebody might say, is that I'm good at administration, I'm good at organization, I'm a good cheerleader for people. And the truth is, social enterprise, anybody will tell you, is a team sport. And so it's not that you have to be the person who actually is generating the idea to be part of this. In fact, the idea people desperately need folks to be involved with them who can anchor it, and anchor it in really practical ways, and who bring skills to the table that the innovator may not have. One of the things that we try to encourage people to do at Hatchathons is to come with a partner. Now, not everybody can do that, but boy, it sure makes a difference if you can, because if you've got somebody else who is in this with you, you are already, more stable than you would be if it were just you on your own. We've learned that if people who are coming to this have somebody they can talk to about their enterprise, are just miles further down the road than people who have just sort of kept it in their head. Because those people, when it's in your head, it's like, I'm not sure, this might be I don't know. But if you talk to somebody about it, suddenly you get confidence, and we get lots of feedback even when we're speaking at places, that as people talk about these ideas that they thought were just little off, they didn't really think that much of them, but as they start talking about them to people, they realize, oh my gosh, this could happen, this could be a thing that actually contributes to ministry. So there's really something about the shared partnership with people. the point is, you don't have to be the person generating the idea to participate in this.
Hmm.
It reminds me of To Write Love on Our Arms, a guy named Jamie Turkowski started. And it was because he met
Oh,
a girl who was depressed.
yeah.
And he cared about one
Mhm.
person and had one spark of an idea, and started an organization to help to battle that,
Yeah.
right? To battle depression and suicide.
Yeah.
But it started because a small idea and concern for one other,
Yeah.
and that struck into something that makes a difference, right? So if you have an idea, don't just let it sit with you. Talk about it. Share it with folks.
Well, and the other thing you said, Brian, is really key too, that it's not just having, what matters is not so much even that you have the idea. What matters is that there's that person that you love enough that you've got to figure out a way to help them.
Mm.
And there's no end to the creative ways parents figure out how to help their children, even if they don't have resources available that you might think are necessary. And there's no end to anybody in youth ministries' creativity, knowing that they've got kids they love, that they want to know what the life of the church is like, to know what the life of faith is like. And they, youth ministry people are pretty darn creative entrepreneurs, even without having the title. Out of love for those kids that they are confronted with day in and day out. And I think having that person in your head who you think God has called you to, to improve their life, to restore their humanity. Greg Boyle didn't start by having an idea for homeboy industry. He started by being surrounded by gang members who would leave the gang if they had jobs. And so he created a way for that to happen.
So if somebody's sitting at home and they got an idea in their head, it's kind of bouncing around, and this all sounds interesting to them, what should they do next? Where can they keep up with Ministry Incubators? Melissa, it looks like you're thinking about something there.
For sure. I have an idea. Now what?
Well, Melissa, you have connections. Let me just say. There are a couple ways. If you just want to noodle about the idea, a lot of times people will just send us an email. We've got a little template on our website called ministryincubators.com. And you can just go there and you fill out a little form and say, here's what I'm noodling on. I'd like to talk to Mark. I'd like to talk to Kenda. And we'll just call you back and we'll talk about it. Of course, the formal way to do it is to actually come to a hatchathon. It's sort of like with our ministry architects process. It's like the assessment. All of a sudden you get a year or more's worth of focused attention in about 3 days,
Yeah.
and you really can sort of push off the wall with that. So that coming to a hatchathon is huge. But also we also have people that have said to us, listen, we either have got to have your help immediately and don't have time to come to a hatchathon because there's not one scheduled, or they say, listen, we think you can be more help to us right now, just coaching us with what we're trying to get off the ground. That's another way that we go about that process. But at this point, our job is, we feel like we get to hear these harebrained ideas and get to watch the surprise on people's faces when we say that might just work.
Yeah. There's another way too that people get involved is that you didn't mention, Mark, is for the people who want to have ongoing help as they're setting up their enterprise. There's a formal arrangement called a partnership, which involves you set goals that you want to reach, and then basically we hang in there with you over several years. We want to make sure that it gets off the ground and gets started well. And that's a more formal arrangement, but that's another possibility.
Excellent.
So using ministry architects terms, I'm curious, like you do an assessment and then sometimes we do follow-up work, and some of that exists through a timeline or a game plan. And so at the end of the hatchathon, do you get a game plan for your harebrained ideas?
Yeah, the difference is that, with our ministry architects assessment, we are responsible as the consultants to write the write the timeline and give it as a part of the assessment process. At the Hatchathon, each individual with their own idea is drafting their timeline, and it's much more rudimentary. It's it's a skeleton timeline, but it begins to make it real and anchor it in real possibilities and real benchmarks. But yeah, that is actually the last module we have before the pitch is they craft their timeline.
Although what we hope will happen is that if they decide to take this idea forward, we have a lot of people at Hatchathons that are still discerning whether they want to go forward or not. They kind of get a sense of how realistic it is during that event. But the ones who really want to take it forward, then they can have, there are various ways that this can happen, but they can talk to Mark or me about, all right, so what would a more definitive kind of action plan look like? So when the food truck was getting off the ground, for example, there was a very detailed kind of timeline and plan that happened to get them up to their launch date that that Mark and I were part of, which was different. That was different from the Hatchathon, but that's because it was an idea that just decided, and this church decided that they wanted to actually go forward. So at that point, they get a little bit more detailed. But I do think that there's something to the person whose idea it is, or the church whose idea it is. They're really responsible for helping develop their own action. It's not something that we hand to them. So there's a lot of investment on the initiator.
So as I'm hearing a lot of this, I'm thinking about it from the average youth minister who's sitting there, who feels that kind of burning inside of them, and they're like, this is exciting, this is real. At the same time, I think one of the things that might be standing in front of them is just a lack of bandwidth. They're sitting there, they have this kernel of an idea, and they're going, what, I barely have enough bandwidth to think about tomorrow, much less a 5-year business plan.
Right, exactly.
So what do you guys suggest for that person who's sitting there, who has the burning inside, but they just don't have the bandwidth right now?
That's the exact person who ought to come to a Hatchathon, because for 3 days, frankly, what a Hatchathon does is it just buys you time to actually dig in and to work on it. And at the other end of the 2.5 days, you can decide, wait a minute, I'm sick of this idea, and I've only spent 2.5 days on it. So that might be a clue. Don't do that. But other people get super excited about it, and they're like, wait a second, now I know, here's my next step. I got to go back and I got to get X, Y, and Z permission so that I can go forward on this. And but if you don't have that time set aside in a place that is not where you go to work, none of us have the bandwidth to be able to really dig into that unless it's there's a near and present reason to. So
that's awesome.
And the other piece is just making the commitment to do something every week. So it could be, the people who have written books, and you guys know this drill, the people who've written books, it's crazy. They write. And it may they write for 20 minutes a day, or sometimes it's just 20 minutes a week, but they're continuing to press forward with this idea. And so, Ministry Incubators is very similar to that. Kenda is writing books and teaching new classes, and all sort of things she's involved in, and we're doing lots of new initiatives with Ministry Incubators and Ministry Architects, and there's all kind of stuff that would keep us busy. But in the middle of that, Ken and I say, well, let's try to talk every week and see if we can do something.
Yeah.
You know what that means? We talk about every 3 weeks and almost get something done in those conversations. But we're into the long, slow burn, not the flash. And so, one of the ideas we play with is, give us 5 hours a week for 10 years, and we're pretty sure you're going to have an enterprise that is not only ministry effective, but financially effective in terms of generating the revenue that you'd like it to generate.
Yeah.
So just it's the do something challenge.
Well, it is. It's extremely exciting to me to know that there are people that just want to help others get their ideas off the ground, and people out there that will say yes. Kenda and Mark, I'm grateful for that. To know that your role as permissionary is there and present in the world, because there's many people who are just they're not going to move on it. They've got a great idea and they're not going to move because no one has said yes. And so if you do have that idea bubbling in your head, come to Mark and Kenda, and let them tell you yes, and help you take the next step. So if people want to follow up with you and your work and what's going on in your world, where can they reach out to you? Where can they keep up with what's going on in your work and in your life? Kenda, would you like to go first as we close up?
Well, I mean, the obvious place is ministryincubators.com, which theoretically keeps everything up to date in terms of what's happening and all that kind of stuff. But we're both pretty easy to find in terms of email too, so we do a lot of those kinds of conversations as well.
Excellent, Mark.
And we've stumbled onto this whole new idea about the World Wide Web. And there's a thing called a blog, which is kind of new to us, but I think between Kenda and I, we have probably been involved in more blogs over the last month than we have in our entire lives.
That's a true story.
So we do have a Ministry Incubators blog, and we are currently on a series called People Who Inspire Us. And we're having such a great time just shining a light on people who are doing great things that are kind of in this missional entrepreneur space.
Fantastic. Melissa?
Email me at melissa@ministryarchitects.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on the Twitter. Yeah.
Stephen?
Yeah, come hang out with me over at organicstudentministry.com, where I blog not as regularly as I have in the past, but I'm going to get back on that horse. And you can come hang out over at Twitter or like my author page on Facebook.
And I am Bryant Johnson, and you can email me at bryant@ministryarchitects.com or find me at Facebook, facebook.com/Bryant Johnson. I may still be on MySpace. I think that's out there as well. And if you guys are on Facebook, don't forget to come check out Ministry Architects, like us there. Feel free to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on YouTube as well. Thanks so much, you guys.
Ha ha!